This is we've been experimenting with doing openers so that we don't just throw you in the hot seat as our guest, and we can kind of update on stuff that's going on in Daniels and our lives, our work, or just stuff we're thinking about. So something I've been thinking about that I want to pose as a opener to this podcast is about AI. Have you guys heard about Sora, the most recent version of ChatGPT? Have you heard of ChatGPT?
Yes.
Okay. So you type in, write me a 1,000-word essay on the Constitution of the United States of America, and it starts going. Well, ChatGPT's newest iteration of AI is called Sora, and it is for creating videos. So you can type in there, make me a historical video of the California Gold Rush. And it won't take like actual footage. It will make very believable footage that looks like it's historic of, wagons and people walking and going through the mountains in Sierra Nevada and whatever. It's really wild. And I bring this up because it's, I think, worth thinking about where we're going with all this stuff. I listened to a great podcast that I highly recommend. Davey, great friend of ours, shared with me. It's called Pints with Aquinas. The episode is titled Transhumanism and Emerging Technologies. Anyway, but it talks about, in length, these guys are all very well read on this subject. So I defer to them if you want to go down the rabbit hole. But, it's fascinating to think where we're going with all this stuff. So with the AI, a big underpinning of this whole movement is this idea of transhumanism. Are you familiar with this? So the definition of it is a philosophical and intellectual movement which advocates the enhancement of the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies that can greatly enhance longevity, cognition, and well-being. It's a lot of words. Basically, it means like using technology to try to live longer, to try to be able to think faster, smarter, to be able to solve limitations in life. Like like Neuralink with Elon Musk's project to cure neural issues in people, or prosthetic limbs, all this kind of stuff. So there's sort of a healthy side to it, but then as you start going farther down that road, there's a less virtuous side to it that I think ties into what's happening with Sora, this new AI, which is sort of the question of like, where does this all end? And what's the point of all this in the first place? And the Sora thing, the danger there, that there's great articles on this, and I think they talk about it a little bit in the podcast I mentioned, but there's some obvious dangers to it, right? Like if anybody can make a video based on text, then I can go in there and type up like, make me a video of the President of the United States declaring war on England or whatever, on Russia, and it would theoretically generate that kind of video. Obviously, they're putting in parameters to stop that, but again, that's where it gets interesting. What are the parameters? Who's deciding the parameters? And frankly, what's the point of all of this stuff anyway? There's a C.S. Lewis quote, and again, I encourage anybody, check out if all of this topic is interesting to you, check out the Pints with Aquinas episode I recommended. But there's a C.S. Lewis quote that I think kind of sums up what I'm thinking. And I think, believe it or not, this is a great intro, I think, to our guest, John. So the C.S. Lewis quote, it comes from The Abolition of Man. I'll just paraphrase. Basically, he says that man has this dream. This dream of man of mastering nature, which is what I think this Sora is working towards, which is what I think this transhumanism is working towards. The dream of man of mastering nature in reality becomes some men mastering the rest with nature as the instrument. So I think on that, and again, it weirds me out where we're going with all this stuff. With the new Apple VR, have you seen that?
Yeah.
So crazy. Where it literally will produce screens. You wear these goggles and it produces screens in your reality. You could be driving a car down the road or riding a bicycle and it'll pop up whatever screens you want to see in and create this alternate reality that you're in. Anyway, so fascinating to think where we're going and what we might be leaving behind. And today's guest, John, is a dear friend, and I think in some ways you are an antithesis to what I was just talking about with where our society is going with this idealized technology, because John is a potter, and he has a really cool business called Acorn Pottery. John, we've known each other for like, oh gosh, at least 15 years now, maybe longer. We're getting old, brother.
I think we met at Christy and Brandon's wedding.
That's
my
right.
guess. That's probably been about 15 years.
Yeah, about 15 years. That's right. Oh, man. So very grateful to have you on today and hear more about your business and your life. And and I do think as we just talk through and have this conversation, I think it's kind of cool to imagine we're sitting here with Daniel the baker, me the farmer, and John who is literally a potter. Like, what is
place-based, baby?
Yeah, that's right. I love it. So,
can I say one thing?
Yeah, Daniel, go ahead.
Back on your technology transhumanism train. I think it's not a conversation for here and now, but my thought was, throughout all history, there have been advances in technology, and those technologies could be used for good or ill, or to advance us towards something less good or better. And I think it's interesting, the conversation around which ones we zero in on as being really harmful, really, this one's really going to do us in, and, looking at you brought up covered wagons, like probably a very small amount of people who ever fell out of a moving covered wagon and died, but these new vehicles thing, if you fall out and it's going 30, you could have some severe, like that was a danger in the advancement of technology. So I think it's interesting to have a conversation around maybe some accelerate us more so than others, but every advance in our history has had these upsides and downsides.
Yeah,
that was just my thought.
Yeah, my sense is like each technology could be used for virtue or vice, and that's where I think like that's where is the line? Where are we going? And I don't have, like you said, it's a whole nother topic to get into answering those questions thoroughly.
Yeah.
So I just sort of bring it up as a question for us to be kind of going in the back of our head. Not that we need to even bring it back up, but just as we enter into the conversation with you, John, because what you do is it's like what Daniel does. We've been talking about potting and equating it in many ways to baking because it's so simple in essence, and yet you've tried to teach me how to throw a couple times, and it is so complicated in doing it well is a craft. It is not just something you figure out and boom, it's done. So it's ancient. It's something we've been doing for a long time. So I think that there's this beautiful juxtaposition we can get into. And that could be a whole nother podcast of where do we think that line is?
Yeah, where do we think the line is? The best thing you said is what we're leaving behind by advancing in those ways. That was a powerful thought that I'll linger with. John, I haven't known you but a few years, but I've been just great quotes from business founders have been really stirring in me. And I heard this quote from a Silicon Valley powerhouse founder, and he said something to the effect that the entrepreneurial's journey is marked with moments of these emotional swings between sheer terror and absolute euphoria with nothing in between. And I found that to be the case in one day I'm thinking, how are we going to make it? Like we literally can't make it. And then the next day it's like, we shall become wealthy within 3 years. It's like the customers love us. Customers hate us. Like this customer, and I just swing, I pendulum swing. So it was encouraging to me that everybody thinks that way. But John, what's remarkable about you and what comes across with just the way you present yourself is you are so steady, and the entrepreneurial thing doesn't seem to have a hold on you like it does me. Like I feel like I am at the mercy of those pendulum swings. Man, you're just so steady. Maybe it's the nature of a potter, with this craft, but that's something I really respect about you, and I'd love to hear more about your psyche as we go along. But We've probably talked enough.
Yeah.
It's probably time to have John
John,
start his
can you
story.
just give us the intro to what Acorn Pottery is today for all the folks listening that haven't heard of your business before?
Yeah, definitely. And I can touch on a couple of those things too. One is, I think the ebb and flow of life, even think of like the tides go up and down. When I first started, I had a desire to kind of even everything out so that my days were consistent, my seasons were consistent. And then like the older and the more I've been a potter, the more I've tried to just like appreciate where I'm at. Like when there's busy time, my head's down, I'm making pots. There's other things I'm saying no to, but I'm thankful the pottery's there and the work's there, and I'm enjoying my time making pots. And then times when there's not as much pottery to make, I'm enjoying more time with family or friends, or like learning and growing in other ways. And so I've kind of like, just learned to appreciate the seasons more than I used to. And as far as technology goes, when you say I'm like an
Antithesis.
well, that's a big word for a potter. But my blood pressure's like going up as you're talking about it, because I'm like very slow to new technology, and like to a degree, I do not like it. And there's like, I despise some things about it. At the same time, I use it. Like I enjoy listening to your guys' podcast. I'm listening on my phone in the studio. I use a kiln that has a computer in it. I use an electric wheel, whereas 100 years ago, potters were making their own wheels, firing in wood kilns, and things were a lot more primitive. And there's still some potters who make and throw that way. But it is interesting to decide what kind of technology to adapt, and like what we feel is good for us individually, our families, and what's good for society. And I think one thing I've noticed is talking to parents who have kids who are older than ours. Our oldest is 13. Is that I've never heard a parent say like, "Man, I wish my kid like knew more technology or spent more time on the computer or more time on the gaming system." It's usually parents talking about how their kids are too absorbed into technology. And so I think it's definitely different. Our generation growing up and learning to incorporate technology versus the younger generations going up with technology being their native language. And I think it's something to be wise in like how we incorporate technology, and just to be thinking about it.
There's a great book. Sorry, I just thought of this, but off the top of my head, there's a great book called The Tech Wise Family. You guys familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
It's a short little book, definitely worth checking out. I can't remember. You'll have to look it up, Daniel. I'm not sure who wrote it, but it's a short little book, and it's really cool because Andy Crouch, thanks. Yeah, and his preface to the book is very similar to what you just said, John. And then he says like, hey, this book is how my family has responded to that what you just said about children being drawn to technology, family, all of us being kind of sucked in where the tech has us versus, like our phones, where the tech has us versus us having our phone, having the tech. So anyway, it goes through and gives like, it's kind of like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It gives sort of a 7 things his family does to relate to tech in a healthy way. And super fascinating book that definitely worth checking out. One of the things they do that's cool is 1 day a week, 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, 1 week a year, absolutely no tech, no speakers to play music through, no nothing. So for 1 hour, 0 tech in the room a day. For 1 day a week, theirs is, I'm pretty sure it's Sunday, they do absolutely no tech. And then 1 week a year, they go on a vacation and no phones, no computers, no watching movies. Pretty cool idea. And he says, hey, this is just how we've responded. This isn't how you have to respond. But it's a really cool picture into like that tension and how this family's responded. So anyway, check that book out.
Yeah, well, sounds like a good read.
Yeah, John, tell us about Acorn Pottery.
All right, so for me, like the idea of being a potter started my senior year in college. Up until that point, I was studying art, and I thought I was going to be a landscape painter, and I was a pretty bad painter. And so I was doing a project, writing a paper on a potter named Shoji Hamada, and he was talking about how there's too many fine arts people in the world who are like creating bad art, and like, what do you do with the bad painting? Like nothing. But if you have a bad pot, you can at least put toothbrushes in it. You can like use it to mix glue. There's like a use for bad crafts. And so I was reading about him, and he's from Japan, and he was a big player in what's called the folk arts movement, where the world was fascinated with industrialization and mass production. And him and lots of other potters, like, we're in the countryside, and there's this idea of an unknown potter, whether it be pottery or woodworking, just like making their craft and producing it for the community they're in. And so I was writing a paper on him. I was also in a wheel throwing class, and that's where you make pottery on a pottery wheel that spins around in a circle real fast. And up until that point, I had made clay objects, but mostly by hand building them. And so about halfway through my pottery wheel class, I was in the studio about 12 o'clock at night by myself and just really having a good time, just making pots. And then I had the thought, I think I'll try and become a potter. And so it happened that I was already moving to Hatteras Island with a few friends that summer. And as I was thinking about becoming a potter, I realized there's a pottery about a mile from where I was going to live. And so when I would go down to visit the island, I would ask the potters, like, hey, can I apprentice with you and work with you? And eventually they said yes. So definitely for me, getting to start off as an apprentice under two potters who were a whole lot farther along than I was really helpful. And they were a married couple, Wes Lassiter and Rhonda Bates, and they treated me like family, taught me so much about having a pottery, the ins and outs of it. And so after a year, I was finished with that and like slowly began to start my pottery business. And so while I was doing that, I also started working for another family, the Roselle family, doing kayak tours. And I have been coaching a soccer clinic with Paul and telling him how I was probably going to try and be a kayak guide that summer. He had always wanted to start a kayak guiding business. He had a parasail business. He fished and worked for Towboat US, towing boats. And he was like, well, do you want to help me start one? And so I started working with his family. And for about 4 years, as I was starting the process of building the pottery, I would work with him at first full-time and then increasingly less as I was building the pottery up. And one neat thing about Hatteras is almost like an incubator for small businesses. Like not everyone, but a large percentage of people just own a small business. And lots of places are known not by the name of the business, but just like by the owner, like that's Brian's or whoever owns it. That's what people call it.
Yeah, Hatteras itself is a real gem of it's like there should be studies on how community is working itself out in Hatteras, because it's like relatively remote. I don't know if you've ever been down there.
I've never been. No.
A lot of people have been to the Outer Banks in North Carolina, but I think very few have driven all the way down to Hatteras, because it's a haul. I mean, from like Kitty Hawk, it's a good, which is like the first part, right?
Yeah, it's like an hour 30 from Kitty Hawk.
And you're just driving through like middle of nowhere beach. It's not even like after a certain point, there's not even towns. It's just beach for a long time.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. And then you get to this island community. That's a great vacation spot, which is why I've been there. But
yeah, I noticed a lot of similarities between there and being in the mountains. Megan and me lived in Stanton together for a year, and there's a lot of like being in touch with like the weather and how that affects you, and a slowness that you get out here that you definitely don't have close to 95 where we live now. So yeah, it was definitely a slow process for me starting the pottery, and I was pretty fortunate. I rented a house, and the person I rented from let me start the pottery in the garage. So not having an extra studio to go to was helpful. And during my apprenticeship, I did have the thought, man, I wish I made pots here, because one day I was bored and thought I could just be working. Which really hasn't been a problem for me. I know some people like to have a separation of work and the rest of life. And if work's there, they feel like they always have to do something. But I've really enjoyed getting to work from home. And it's actually kind of hard for me to leave the house. Like, I don't like running errands. I mean, I was excited to come here and be with you guys. But in general, I'm usually just at home throughout the day.
Mm-hmm. Sorry to interrupt, the 4 years that it took you to start and kind of get some traction, was your intention to break away from the kayak guiding service? Like you had a single-minded focus, or the pottery was just kind of, well, just do it on the side, see where it takes me? You know, what was your thought process going into it?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. I think if I had started working for the Roselle family, I still might be working for them. Like, I love working for them. But when I was an apprentice, having like the pressure of having to work with someone else's schedule was challenging. And it really came to a head, I think, when my grandmom was dying and she was in hospice. And my bosses were actually really gracious with me, and I went to be with her and the rest of my family. But then she's resilient and like was taking a while to die. And my boss was like, are you coming back yet? Are you coming back yet? And so I had this pressure to leave and go back. And I think that's probably the first time I thought, like, I just want to work for myself, so I don't have someone telling me when and where to be. And not that I was necessarily wrong what they were doing. And so by the time I had started working for Paul, I already made up my mind. I'm starting a pottery. I want to be my own boss. And yeah, actually, I started off working just in the summer with him as a kayak guide. I would help with tows sometimes or parasailing, but then he needed someone to fish with him. And I thought, man, like, I want to learn more about the water. Like, this guy's like a waterman, knows so much about being on the ocean, and it'd be a neat experience. And so it kind of just kept on growing into itself. And so it wasn't necessarily like full time. Maybe like there's seasons where there's a lot of work, then it would be slow. And then after probably the first year or two, pottery was my main thing, but I enjoyed working with them and being out in the water. So I kind of just would do it a little bit in the summer.
So you were fishing and potting, is that?
Yeah, which there was a tension in that like fishing is based on the weather. So the next day you might not necessarily even know if you're going to work or not. So I'd make a bunch of pots with the intention of going back and finishing them. And then I'd have to fish for a couple of days and my pots would dry out. And in pottery, how much moisture in the pots dictates what you can do with the pottery. And you can put plastic on it to slow it down. But sometimes my pots just be hard to keep up with them while fishing. And I only fished for them for one winter. And so the rest of the time it'd be like during the summer, I would do kayak tours for a few months and then go back to doing pottery. But yeah, it's definitely a slow start for me making pottery. It's best, obviously, to learn from other people's mistakes. But I kind of liken it to if you've ever canoed before. Like the first time you canoe, like you make this big S, you go back and forth, and it's hard to go in a straight line. And like the more you do it, the more you can like check yourself and where you're going. And once you've canoed for a while, it's like every time you take a stroke, you're making sure you're going in the right direction. It's like subconscious. And so I found being a business owner at first, like I would get a batch of clay and I might make 100 pots where there's bubbles in my pots. I don't know why. I just keep on doing the same thing over and over again. And now I know, like, okay, that clay is getting a little bit too hot. I have to put it on the top or bottom of my kiln. Or if that mistake happens, I would just stop doing it until I figured it out. Whereas before, I'd make these big mistakes and just take forever.
Make 100 of those pots and be like, oh, they all have bubbles. Oh.
Yeah. And so there was like tons of broken pots. Like we used to play games with broken pottery.
I remember, this is one of my earliest memories of hanging with John. You had like a whole shelf of stuff that looked great. And he's like, oh yeah, those all have like little defects. And I was like, what? And you're like, yeah, watch. And you just threw it on the ground. I was like, oh my gosh. You're like, yeah, no, these are all ones you can use or break.
That's crazy. What was your first sales like? Who were those two? And then when along that process did you think, I can do this. I can do this. People want to buy my pottery.
Yeah, so my first sales, like I would sell my work when I was an apprentice, which was pretty exciting for me in the pottery shop. But then I remember my first sale, at least my first big one, I started my pottery, I think it was probably like in October of 2004 or November is when I finally got everything together and had my own studio set up. And a family that lived across the canal from me, they ordered, I think like 5 or 6 teapots for their family Christmas. And the lady's name was Beth Scudin. And for me, I mean, they were just like, each teapot cost $50. It was like $350 order, but it was like so big. And to have someone want like as a potter, making a teapot is like it's a really fun thing to do. So to have someone like order that and it's like these special Christmas presents for their family was pretty fun. So yeah, it was definitely slow going at first. I saw pottery kind of however I could. I had a little gallery in the house I lived in where sometimes I would sell through. I would do art shows. A lot of times there would be small local shows at potentially another art gallery for an afternoon. I started doing wholesale logo mugs, and I met a potter in Kitty Hawk who he told me, he's like, wholesale logo mugs are my bread and butter. And so that's when I was like, all right, I'm going to try and sell more of those. And that's just where I make a logo for a company. I put it on the mug and then sell it to the company. And then they either sell or give it away to their customers as a way to help the company connect with their customers. And so I slowly started doing that more and more. And so for me, I kind of divide my business up into 3 different seasons so far. One is living in Hatteras, and I lived there for 5 years. And then I met my wife, Megan, while she was on vacation in Hatteras, and she was living in Stanton. So I moved away. Once we got married, I moved to Stanton and started the business. And so like our early marriage and our first couple of kids would be kind of next season of the business. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, we bought just like a small homestead outside of town, and then moving the business there has kind of been like the third iteration. So one thing I think has been challenging is moving with the small business and getting new contacts, having a new workflow, being in a new space. And the first space I was in was a 2-car garage. When I moved to Stanton, like this basement is like twice the size at least of my studio there. Like I could scratch my head on the ceiling. There was no room when we were looking at the house. I was like, I can't work there, but we ended up living there. And that's one of the things that was helpful for us is so that house, we rented it for $575. So like not having the pressure of a huge overhead is definitely helpful as we're getting our businesses going off the ground. And so for that's about our first 5 or 6 years of marriage, my wife, Megan, worked for Young Life. And so I'd say we probably made 50-50, like we both made half of the income we needed to make as a family. And then as we started to have kids, I started to be pretty intentional with my business and go a lot more towards wholesale versus retail or doing craft shows, just because having a young family, just getting to know my schedule and be at home worked really well. Megan had a pretty demanding schedule where she had to work at nights and travel sometimes for her work. And then about our third son, Hudson, he's 9 years old. And right before he was born, Megan stopped working. And so I think that for us as a family, that was like a lot easier. I mean, it's definitely scary to a degree, just depending on pottery, but easier to be a little bit more focused and not going in more directions as a small business. Yeah. And so the first couple of years that she didn't work for Young Life, she didn't really do very much with the business. But every year she's done more and more and become more engaged. And so she does all of our marketing, our admin, our correspondence. And I think I feel like you guys are probably a little more professional than me. I'm not really good with emailing. And so I was talking to a friend and
I can deal with all that pesky technology for you.
Yeah, she does. And I told my friend I had a goal. If like someone emailed me, I want to email them back within 48 hours was my new goal.
Yeah.
And he was like, if I don't email someone back within 6 hours, they think I'm dead. And so like, I know like my standards are low, but like she's done like a really good job. Like she's definitely more professional, is good at keeping things going. And it's been really fun for us running the pottery together and just having different perspectives on things to figure out what the next best move forward is. My oldest son is 13 and he helps out a lot. Packing pottery is kind of his main thing he does, but still sometimes helping with production. I have an assistant, Gabriel, who he started working for me about 4 years ago. And at times he has a friend too, James, who had worked for me, and having other people to help produce work in the studio or have different perspectives on how things have been done has been really helpful. I say being a potter, I'm sure it's the same for you guys with your businesses. Farming and baking is like, it's just intertwined with your life. If like anything affects pottery, affects the rest of my life. If something in life is going on, it affects how I'm making pots. But I definitely enjoy it a lot. And yeah, I'm like real thankful I am a potter. I would actually recommend if you don't know what you want to do, like you might want to become a potter just because it's such like a rewarding thing to do.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's funny, Daniel, what you're saying about how it feels intuitive to be.
I should be a potter. Maybe I'll transition.
Well, like I could be a baker, but I can tell you, being neither a baker or a potter, I've had experiences with each of you where Jill was making bread at home. This is like a year ago, and something happened with the dough on one of the proofs or rises or something, and it was like messed up, like it had gone totally flat. And Daniel happened to be swinging by our house to like drop something off, and Jill's like, "Daniel, I've done this bread like many times. It's never done this before." Dan's just like, "You got any flour?" He like throws it on the island and just starts working. He's like, "You just got to get some air into it," or whatever. I don't remember what it was. Do you remember? You like literally saved this dough.
I don't remember what.
We thought it was totally done for. By the time Daniel left, it was like this big ball of dough. We're like, Jill's like, I don't even know what he just did, but that was awesome. And then I remember when you were teaching me how to throw, like it is so much trickier than you think. And it was like a rom-com, like John came over and just put his hand on my hand. And then instantly it like became what I was trying to do. It became a perfect little pot. I was like, "Oh, that's awesome." He takes his hand off and it's like, "Oh, wow." It starts going oblong again. It's such a skill. Anyway,
on that note, several folk, before we jumped into the bread, some family members said, this is what you love. If you decide to do it as your profession, I just see you losing your love of it. Has that ever been the case for you, making your hobby your profession in your experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for me, I kind of when I first started getting into pottery and just thought I'd try and become a potter, I just wanted to make pots. I didn't even think of owning a business. And so that's like the second part of the thought. But I say that for me, a big thing is I enjoy pottery if I'm not rushed. And so I try and work quickly, but not in a hurry. And so if I have like tons of deadlines and I'm kind of behind, I don't enjoy it as much. But as long as I can kind of keep it where essentially, if you're talking about the 7 habits of highly effective people, like quadrant 2, where it's like important but not urgent, my joy goes up. And I don't really enjoy that. I guess the accounting is a struggle for me. So that's like one area where I'm like, I don't like it. But on the other hand, my dad's my accountant. And so accounting, I get to like spend more time with him. So parts of it I like. So I'd say in general, even when I don't like something, there's silver linings in it. And so, I think that people have a lot of advice along the lines of what you're saying. One would be like, don't work with your family,
right,
or your friends. That like there could be some truth in it, or like walk with wisdom in it. But I think like the reward is so much higher, like doing something you love or working with people you really care about and love.
Can you give us, before we go too much further, just the general lay of the land working with clay, and what the process of making pottery looks like, kind of once over the world for us who don't know it?
Yeah. And so I make mostly functional work, and my pottery is not overly decorative. It's pretty simple and to the point. So for me, I order clay from a company in Asheville, North Carolina, Highwater Clay. And the clay comes in 25-pound bags. It's refined. There's like no air bubbles in it. So I can just take the clay. I weigh it out about a pound or a pound and a half will be a mug. If I'm making a bigger bowl, that'll be 5 pounds. But I weigh out the clay so that what I'm making is the right size. And then I just get the clay, throw it down on the potter's wheel, add water to it. And most things, like a mug takes at most 2 minutes. A bigger bowl might be 4 or 5 minutes. Sometimes I make things like a fermenting crock that's a little more complicated and takes more time. But it's interesting, so when you first start off, throwing on the wheel is the hardest thing. And it'll take you like 15 or 20 minutes to try and center something. But after you've done it for a while, throwing it is actually the easiest step. So I throw the pottery. I do most things in sets. So say...
When you say throw the pottery, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I picture you throwing the clay on the wheel, but you mean actually building the...
Yeah, and so that's what you actually do to start off. You do throw the clay onto the wheel to get it to stick, and then throwing would be the actual... You have your hands on the clay while it's spinning around in a circle, and you're like making the clay go up. And the centrifugal force with the pressure just makes the clay do what you want it to do. And so after you make the piece, I'll set it to the side. A lot of times I work with boards. Say if I'm making mugs, I'll put 12. At that point, they're just cups on a board. And once they dry, then I'll add handles. If they're logo mugs, I'll add logos. But you have to pay a lot of attention, because if the pots get too dry, things won't stick. If the pots are still too wet, when you go and press a handle on, it'll bend the shape of the handle or bend the shape of the mug. If you dry things too quick, they get warped. So I'm always paying attention to that. And then once I have about 100 mugs, or if I have bowls, it might be like 40 bowls, I'll put them in a kiln, which is essentially like a giant oven. And my kiln's an electric kiln. I have 2 of them. One will make about 120 mugs at a time, the other about 70 mugs. And the first firing is called the bisque firing, and that heats up to about 1800 degrees. And so then once that comes out of the kiln, I'll paint wax on the bottom, and then I'll glaze the piece. And I have 2 main ways I glaze. One is I dip the piece of pottery into a bucket, and the other is I spray the glaze. And most of my pottery is just dipping the mug in a bucket. And the glaze is essentially ground up rocks. And so one of my main glazes has silica, wollastonite, a kaolin, something called nepheline syenite, and a frit. And mixing them together at the right ratios has them melt at about 2150 degrees Fahrenheit, which is called cone 6. And so then I'll add colorants to the glazes. Like if I want a blue glaze, you add a little bit of cobalt. If you want green, you add copper and rutile. You can get colorants to kind of make it easy if you want to get something like a yellow or a red that's hard to get naturally. And then, I glaze them, put them in the kiln, then take them out. Each firing takes about 24 hours to heat up and then cool down. How thick or thin the glaze is really affects what the glaze looks like. How slow or quick you let it cool affects the glaze, like where it is in the kiln. So it's pretty fun, like learning like all the intricacies of what goes into a pot. And
it's so much like baking. Like it's in theory, it is very simple.
It's such a simple
relatively
process.
simple ingredients, relatively simple process until you start getting into
thousands of variables.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever have like where you can't figure out what's going wrong, or can you usually at this point know how to fix something?
That is not my strong point, despite what Buddy said. But the team of bakers, we can usually diagnose the problem really quickly, even amidst all the variables. Yeah. So what is a day in your life look like amidst you have 7 children, lovely wife. The demands of working there at home. What does a day look like for you?
Yeah, it depends on the season. So I'm in my slower season. Right now, our family, lots of people have been sick, so like we don't really sleep. So our day is like by 8 or 8:30, everyone's waking up. My wife cooks breakfast. We deliberately have slow mornings in general. So we'll eat breakfast together, and then we'll read the Bible and pray together. And then I've been getting out to the pottery around 9:30, and I start making work, like whatever I have. Like I know what people have ordered. Most of my pottery is made to order, so I don't make it till someone's ordered. But then we also have a retail side selling on the website, and now have our gallery. So when the wholesale side slows down, I just jump in and make more pots that I'll then sell on the website. So I make the pots that are on the list to make that day. I definitely go in and out of work. So sometimes I might be in the studio for 2 or 3 hours, then get lunch, then go back in the studio. Sometimes an appliance breaks or something, so I'll go out to doing that. We have a small farm, so sometimes I'll do things with the animals in between. And so I'm kind of going back and forth all day between work and not working. This time of year, I try not to work past about 8 o'clock. During the summer, like spring and fall, a lot of times, depending on what has to be done, I'll work till like 11 is normal, but sometimes it'll be like 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning to keep on meeting deadlines and getting things done.
Whoa.
But that's in conjunction with like, I'm not getting up real early and starting work. In the summer, I might start work at 8:30 or 9, but I also have breaks set up in between. The kids can just go into the studio. Our 3-year-old will be inside, and like Megan's watching her, and then like she's like, I don't know where she went. And she like just comes into the studio, and the kids do actually a pretty good job in there. Like I occasionally, they will be disruptive to me in my workflow, but I've kind of designed it so the only thing I have to concentrate for is when I'm mixing glazes. If I put the wrong material in, I'll mess up the glaze. So other than that, they're usually fine to come in. Sometimes they'll make their own thing. Sometimes they want to talk or do other projects. So cool. And you think like little kids would break pottery a lot, but like,
yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
They don't break it any more than I mean, I break more pottery than anyone else does. Like they're good at carrying a bunch of it. The littlest ones will pack pottery or move it at least. And so one thing I found real helpful for me is like I want to be around my kids. I want the pottery to be a place that they enjoy being. Like I don't want it to be something like, oh, we can't go in there because dad's working. And I know in some jobs like you need to have a wall between what's going on, but for us it's been good to have it open. I want them to be glad I'm a potter. Sometimes if I'm listening to a podcast, and the rule I set is if they come in and I'm listening to something, if they want to hang out, I just like turn it off so they know that like, I want to be with them. One helpful thing has been paying them so they're more motivated to work when I'm paying them money.
Yeah, when it's time to
and they
go to work.
And so then they can save up and buy things they want to buy. And I found for us it's worked really well in that like they're motivated to get something, and then I think they take better care of something when they buy it with their own money.
Do you do that, Daniel, with your boys?
We do it. Yeah.
Of course, Tirza I know works for you, but
Tirza, Thad, and Finn.
And
the next two haven't, but
13. That's 10.
10, and Finn will be 7 next month. Yeah.
What do we know?
I know.
That's cool. Yeah, but this summer is going to be our first summer of the kids having specific farm chores, and because up until now it's been kind of like, hey, dad's going to go do this, you want to come with me? And now they're getting to the age where, especially Knox, he's 7, and he wants to be in charge of something. It's pretty sweet. So I'm excited to hand the reins over to him. But I've been in certain areas, but I've been debating, do I pay him or not? And I think that that's an encouraging. It's encouraging to hear that that's working well for you, for them to like see the fruits of their labor in a tangible way, and they get the opportunity to make a decision with the money they've made, versus asking us always for something they want. And yeah, I can see the benefits of that. I had an idea for a side business for you, John. You could make could be anywhere. It could be a shed on the farm, could be a space downtown. And what you do is you can rent out that space and you put all of your pots in there that have a defect that you can't sell, and people can go in there and break them. Somebody must have told you this business idea. And you can go and be like, yeah, you have that feeling like you just want to like take something, smash it on the ground. There's people that have that, and they could go into your.
What are those places called? They're legit brick and mortar places.
Yeah, it's
a rage room.
Yes, that's it, a rage room. But for pottery, I feel like there's something more, maybe like there's a specific niche that just wants to break pottery that you need to find, and it's like, yeah, it's $100 an hour or whatever. You charge them by the pot, however we go, and they just get to go in there and just bam. Oh, I can see that being fun.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good idea. I'll get back to you in a year and
I
let
don't
you know.
like rage room. That sounds intense.
So does smashing hundreds of dollars worth of pottery.
Okay, maybe not the best idea. That's the studio the kids can't go.
Yeah, that's awesome. John, from what it sounds like and the way I picture, I haven't been to your setup, but it sounds like you've managed to find this wonderful equilibrium, work and family. It's so beautifully integrated. Do you consider growth? Do you consider hiring on full-time employees so you're 2 a.m.s or 6 p.m.s? Does this cross your mind, or do you like where you're at? What does growth look like for you? I guess is the multi-part question.
Yeah, the short answer would be I don't know, but like the long answer would be yes. Like about 4 years ago, Gabriel started working for me, and it has been really helpful, especially when I'm busy. Is he's someone who can kind of do a little bit of everything. Like he can deliver pots, he can glaze pots, he can clean up the studio. If you need animal help, he helps with the animals. He can put pots together. So that has given me the ability to make more pots. I'd say one challenging thing for me, and you probably have good insight to this, is like my studio is like 10 feet from my house. And so like whoever's working is like literally like living with our family while they're working. So I'm kind of more driven to like want to hire towards character and integrity versus like skill set in knowing pottery, making pottery. Yeah, as far as growth, I definitely, as our family's gotten bigger, there's a need to make more money to sustain our family. So every year we grow and get bigger, which is important as our family's growing. But I don't necessarily have a goal of like, I want to be able to make this much money. I think long term, I like the idea of getting to purchase a bigger piece of land for whatever kids want to live on there to live on there. But I don't have like any specific goals as far as like I want to get this big. A lot of our Megan and mine's conversation has just been around like, okay, how are we going to increase retail sales? How are we going to get more wholesale customers? And there's still a capacity for making and being more efficient with our time.
What are your means of marketing? Is it all word of mouth? Are you in social media? How does Megan manage that, and what does that look like for you all?
Yeah, so most of our business is wholesale logo mugs, and most of it is returning customers. So like the same people place similar orders year after year. Social media helps out a whole lot with retail and getting new wholesale customers. A lot of times, a lot of our sales are through word of mouth. Definitely posting on Instagram will lead to sales when Megan or I do that. So yeah, mostly marketing is just social media at this point. Occasionally I do find businesses I want to work with and I seek them out. And sometimes it works really good. Most of the time it doesn't. Like last year I had 3 businesses I actually made mugs for, like sent them mugs, gave them letters, price lists. Still none of them became customers. But some of my best customers have taken a long time. Where like I've sent them mugs, heard nothing. I called them up. Yeah, we like them. And then one time I brought a customer like 20 mugs. I was like, do you want to buy these? And they're like, sure. And then like 2 weeks later, they're like, we need more mugs.
With their logo on them?
Yeah. And they became one of my best customers. So like sometimes like persistency pays off. Other people have been persistent like that. And they're just like, no.
If you, on that note, this idea of persistence, thinking about what has made you successful, if you had to put your finger on, not in this promotional way, don't be self-deprecating, but like what has led to you being a successful potter?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like the grace and mercy of God, like God providing, and also God giving wisdom and like what to do or what not to do. I think seeing failures as not necessarily getting like doing something bad, but like this didn't work, so now I know something not to do, and then just moving on, and yeah, just like having the grit to keep on trying to figure things out, even when they're not looking like they should. I think being okay too. Like if pottery didn't work out, like it would be okay. I wouldn't be. It'd be right for a while. It worked and then it didn't. I mean, and presumably it will keep on working, but not having a fear of things not going how I want them to go has been real helpful.
That's that what you were talking about in the beginning, Daniel. That not having the pendulum swing of
Just steady.
we made it, or
Yeah.
we're screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's a part of outside looking in. As an entrepreneur, John, that's something that you kind of, to your point of if pottery didn't work, like that skill set in entrepreneurship is beautiful, and I think would carry you in any other pursuit that you chose to do. I love the challenge of thinking that way. The word I think of when you're saying that is gratitude. And I found like when I'm not grateful for something that's going on, and it can even be a hard season, like it could be the pain of not booking a wedding I really wanted to book at the farm, or not selling some cows that I thought for sure this person was going to buy them. Like even being grateful for that, that's been Jill's and my new mantra when something we don't want happens, like, oh, those people didn't buy those heifers we thought were going to buy them. Jill will say to me, I'll update her with that info, and Jill goes, good.
Great. Yeah.
Great. And not like in a pie in the sky, everything's going to be fine, but in like okay, let's trust the Lord that He has a plan. Whether that's, and whether that means we're going to sell these heifers or not, that's beside the point. Like, let's trust God with what we're doing and be grateful for whatever He's teaching us through us not selling these heifers or this struggle that we're in the business or whatever. And equally, when things are going well, I think I do this thing where I'm not grateful for what's currently happening when things are going really well. And I look past it to the next thing. I have this, I got to get the next thing going. I've got to get, and for years I was unaware that I did that, and there's benefits to it and there's costs to that perspective of always looking ahead. A benefit is lots of things. I've got lots of things going, lots of things happened, but the cost was personal, and the personal loss was not enjoying and being grateful for all the stuff God's doing in my life, and like sort of pretending to be grateful and then just moving on. So I'm deeply encouraged by your approach to owning the business. That is really cool. And I think it would carry you no matter what you do. And what you said about pottery just now is just the perfect example of that.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, I'm not naive to think I know a lot of people listening wouldn't believe in Jesus or follow Him, but like for me, having my identity and my security in Him just gives me so much more freedom to kind of be detached. Like if something fails, like I don't have to be like, oh no, I look bad, this didn't work out. It's like I'm doing the best as I can. Like I know who I am in Christ. I know who my family is. Like I'm moving on.
Can I ask you, along these lines, what has been, because obviously you care about your work, what's been one of the biggest lessons learned for you? You mentioned like things don't go well sometimes, and I can kind of like, okay, don't do that again. What's been one of the most impactful one of those?
Yeah, I think responding when people don't like what you did has been good for me. Like growing and being humble and being in grace, like walking in grace, and like I don't.
So like you delivered a product and they're like, hey, this isn't what we wanted.
Yeah, and so I had like a specific instance where we had a new customer. They ordered mugs. They liked it the first time. They ordered them again. I thought I made them. They're very specific. I made them as best as I could, and I was like, these turned out pretty good. Send them. Don't hear anything for like 2 months. Then they write back and like, we don't like them. And they're like, we're like, why don't you like them? And they're like, what can we do? So we're like, well, we can give you your money back, or we'll make you more. And so like to have like the right attitude in that. Like I don't want to just do something. I want to have like the right heart towards the person. And then making them again. And then this time thinking like, I made them how they wanted them. But like, I don't think they're as good mugs. So something that happens is the more, I feel like for me, the more freedom it has, if someone says, make the best pot you can, it'll probably turn out better than if someone's like, I need something really specific. But having the right heart in it is like a challenge. And so one thing I arrived at in my thinking was that this person, like, they're very specific in how they want something, but for whatever their role is in their business, it's probably actually really helpful, and it's good they're that way, and it's like an asset to the company that they work for that they think that way. I'm not super specific, so we're probably just like not a good fit. And it's not like something's wrong with them. It's not necessarily that something's wrong with me. I do want to grow and be able to meet customers like demands better, but it's like having the right heart orientation towards someone is like something that I feel like I've grown in the last year. But still have a lot of room for growth. It's like my initial response. And I found that in general, like if something happens in the studio that doesn't turn out right, my initial response could be like, did Gabriel, like my assistant, did he do that? I'm like, no, actually that was me. Or like,
I do that all the time. Who did this?
One time I was jumping one of our Jetta. Megan accidentally left the car door open, the battery went dead. I was jumping it across the wires. It's like they caught on fire. And so I'm like running to the garage to get the fire extinguisher. And I'm like, why did Megan let the car battery go dead? It's like it's like an easy thing. It's completely my fault. Like my initial response is like to want to blame it on someone else. Yeah. So like when I talk, I don't usually do that. Like I take responsibility, but like I want like my heart to right from the get go be like, all right, this is on me.
It's back to the garden. It was the woman that you gave me, God, that gave me the fruit. Pointing the finger. Oh yeah, dude, that's powerful. Yeah, and there's that identity piece to that where if you get negative feedback from a customer, hey, we didn't like this experience, we didn't like this product. There's that kind of gut reaction of making it about like, oh, I'm a failure. They didn't like what my life's passion and work is. They didn't like my version of that for them, and like you kind of go down this rabbit hole of fruitless thought, and or you can choose to own it, like you said, take on the ownership, ask questions, grow, learn, ask forgiveness. That's a big one. That's tough in business. I find myself tempted to be the people pleaser, especially on the wedding side of things. You know, this is like the most important day of these people's lives, and we don't take it lightly. But man, if any little thing gets messed up, because there's never a big issue. It's if we ever have an issue, it's always some like little thing that we didn't know this was really important to them, or didn't know that this, you know, this they wanted this to happen this way, or whatever. Maybe me or one of our other people dropped a ball on something we were supposed to do. Anyway, it's just so easy for me to go down that road of making it about my identity, being in this worldly pursuit versus being in Christ.
Yeah. And I think like being a business owner, we have a lot of responsibility, but freedom, the neat thing is like freedom goes with that. Like culturally, we tend to separate responsibility and freedom, whereas I think God's design is to put the two together. And so I think one of the challenges with that can be like taking the right amount of responsibility. Like I don't want to be egotistical. Like this didn't work out. It's like all my fault, but I want to take the proper amount of responsibility for when things don't go right and own it, learn, and then move on. So I think not dwelling on stuff has been important too. Like definitely make mistakes. I made a mistake. I learned from it. I'm moving on. I'm not even going to like keep on thinking about it and let it take over.
I love that. That's like the other Jocko quote that I always think of, which is his whole thing of discipline equals freedom. I think there's kind of a connection there too of like responsibility equals freedom. They go hand in hand versus pointing the finger.
John, talking, you know, what keeps the family sustained, you know, the money that's coming as a result of your work. We talked before, so feel free to share or not share, but I think Buddy and I are both curious about the margins that you're working with, you know, the scale of your operation. You know, if you're spending 12 hours in there and it takes 2 minutes to make a mug, you're producing a ton of pottery. Would you share some of the numbers surrounding your business to give the audience an appreciation of how much product you're making and what kind of margins you're working with, as much as you're comfortable?
Yeah, so for pottery, as a craft, it's probably a little bit unique in that materials aren't really that expensive. You're paying for mostly is time, versus say like a jewelry maker who materials could be like 50 or 75% of the cost. And so for me, materials every year end up being about 10% of revenue. It's pretty common for potters to use a mug as a measuring stick for what they need to do and how much they need to make. And most potters sell more mugs than anything else. And so for me, my mugs sell retail for $40 and wholesale for between 15 and 25, depending on the style mug and how many mugs someone orders. I guess it'll vary. Maybe on average, I'm making 200 mugs a week. Some weeks could be a lot more. Some could be left. Some could be less. Some weeks I might not make any mugs. It'd be rare, and I might make like a lot more bowls or fermenting crocks. And I'm trying to think. Having like I work in, there's an old barn that's right next to our house that I make my pottery in. So not having to have a separate place that I rent. And when I first moved to the area, I was looking at places I could rent before we had a house, and it would cost $500 to rent out about a 15 by 15 space. And so I think that's probably one hiccup for potters. The other is I'd heard Ben and Jerry on a podcast talking. I don't know their second name or last names, Ben and Jerry, the ice cream people. Okay. And one of them actually wanted to be a potter. And they said how their parents weren't really supportive and didn't want them to be. And I'm pretty fortunate. My parents have been like super supportive of me becoming a potter. Yeah. But he was trying to make it as a potter in New York City. Like I couldn't now even be a potter in New York City. So like living in a place that doesn't have high rent, a high cost of living is really helpful in sustaining ourselves as a family. Like growing and raising some of our food has been helpful. Knowing that there's going to be lean months like in the winter is helpful to make sure that I'm saving up and storing up in the fall. And that my first winter as a potter, I was like, now what? Like, I didn't know that, like, I was going to make, like, no money. And in general, and on the island, I live, like, restaurants closed for the winter.
Right.
But I didn't realize that I'm just not going to make any money. So that was hard to figure out.
Something I hear you saying that's pretty cool is your business is pretty lean and mean, like, costs-wise. You've always been intentional about not, like, I can afford another space, so I'll rent it and move my pottery into this other space. You've been intentional about keeping it on your farm. I think that's pretty cool, and I don't want to keep going on the broad strokes number side of things because I think that is fascinating to get a sense of that. But I love that approach because, man, especially recently I've been talking to many entrepreneur friends of mine that are like, everybody's kind of reassessing where are we spending too much money? Where's this credit card bill bleeding out that I don't even realize I'm spending on these subscriptions or these, whatever it is, things I don't need.
Yeah, and so probably part of my mentality comes from, I must have heard someone talk about this like a long time ago when I was starting the business, like the idea if I'm reaching for this cup and I reach out, the farther I reach, like the more vulnerable I am. And so like wanting to not necessarily be that exposed. Now at the same time, like the bigger the risk, the greater the reward, so you can potentially miss out. But then also, when I was making pottery and the housing market crashed in 2007, 2008, like things changed a lot as far as what people would buy. And actually I had my wife's aunt had a friend who made pottery, and he had actually just expanded into like adding onto his house, having a bigger studio, and had this huge overhead right when that happened. And so I remember her saying like how hard that was for him. So kind of just like seeing that happen is probably, I wouldn't necessarily say this made me be more cautious. Like I've still tried to build the pottery, but it's made me probably keep things closer in.
How was COVID for you?
So I mean, it was crazy, like seeing that you kind of see everything getting ready to happen, like in the distance. And when things started, like everything shut down. And so I went from having wholesale orders, like coming out of a slow winter, how it usually is, to like everything was dead. Fortunately for us, Megan, that winter had been working on our website to sell more retail. And so we switched gears real quick and just started selling retail. I think too, like that time was really cool. Like friends and family and community we didn't even know, like were buying pots. And I think people were aware it was like a hard season for small business owners. So that really meant a lot to us. And then for us though, probably about after 3 months or so, as more businesses start to open back up, pottery sales actually started to get better. And one of the aspects of that was probably we sell a lot on Hatteras Island still, and Hatteras was a natural place for people to go on vacation because people could be more spread out, be on the beach, and so
very remote.
Yeah, for like the next 3 years, Hatteras saw like a big uptick in sales, which was good for me. I mean, I'd say in general, like it probably led to me like trusting big business or government a whole lot less, which I would say is a good thing. But then at the same time, trusting my neighbors and my friends and family more. I'm thinking of like a relationship I have now. There's a farmer a mile down the road, and we trade hay for pottery. And it's like I don't know. I just really enjoyed the interactions they have. Their dad actually grew up in Bath County, and so he has stories of like not having power for 4 months in the winter and like milking the cow, being chased by the bulls and everything.
Oh my God.
That are like really fun to hear. And so yeah, I think wanting to not depend like on unseen forces was like something that's like reinforced over the last 4 years, and the idea of like being more interdependent in our community. Like there's times where we get to help people out, and there's times where other people get to help us out, and like the joy in that interaction in that community. And for us, it really came to a head about 2 years ago. There was a storm, and there was probably like to get out of the street we're on, there was like 100 trees that were down on the road. We lost power for over a week, and we lost internet. And one of the interesting things that happened was like we had no idea what was going on in the outside world, but then we talked to neighbors. People would be out, but like we knew what was going on with our neighbors next door, and that is like what usually happens in the world. It's not what it is now, and so it's kind of like a little glimpse into I don't know how things were, which we really enjoyed a lot.
That's so interesting that a storm or that COVID and then this basically two natural disasters, I say probably with an asterisk, but the storm like caused that kind of connection between the communities. That's what it takes now for us to get back together. That is interesting. Another thing I want to ask you about, John, is you mentioned earlier if somebody wasn't sure what they wanted to do but wanted to start a business, you'd recommend pottery. Can you kind of give us like here's John's like one way you could do it. Here's a roadmap if you're thinking about starting pottery. Maybe some numbers like this is how much a kiln is. This is how much your first wholesale order clay is going to be this much. You kind of talked a little bit about mug numbers, which is like a good just benchmark. I think for somebody to know like, hey, what should I sell my mug for? And let's assume they can. Obviously, they'll have to figure out how to actually make a mug. There's that in there. But anyway, give us your thoughts on what they should do.
All right, yeah, I give that advice because I think it's important to pay attention to what you measure in life. And if you're growing up in our culture, one of the things that gets measured is GDP, like how much revenue, like what's being sold, what's the product. And I think for kids growing up, there can be such a focus on how much money you're going to make at a job, and that can be the number one priority. And obviously, to sustain yourself and have a family, you need to make money. But I'd say like the things that like the joy I get in getting to have a craft and be with my family and interact with the community, just like it makes me feel rich inside. Like in the middle of the night last night, I was helping my daughter who was like waking up and sick, and I just thought like, man, I am wealthy. Like I'm like so rich like to have like this family that I love so much. And no one by any stretch of the imagination will come and see our setup and be like, that guy's wealthy in terms of like worldly wealth. But yeah, as far as starting off, a kiln's something you can find on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. You could get a good used kiln for $1,500. You could get a good new one for $3,000 now. You'd have to get an electrician to put a circuit in for you, or if you know a friend, it's not that hard to do.
Or like 220.
Yeah, and it's like a 60 amp breaker for most electric kilns. And this is if you're trying to get started, an electric kiln is the easiest way to go because it's the most basic and straightforward. So let's say $2,000 for a kiln. We're going to say that you can either put the kiln in a garage, a basement. If you can't do that, you could build a lean-to or even just get a shed from Home Depot or get a used shed, another $2,000 if you don't have the space to have your kiln outside of where you're living, just because the kiln does produce fumes. To get clay costs about 60 cents a pound. I mean, the more you order, the less it is. The less you order, the more it is. So say you get started, you want 500 pounds of clay. So say you're paying $300 on clay. You'll need to get raw materials to mix your glazes together. You'll probably need to spend $800 on raw materials to mix your glazes. You'll need lots of buckets. You can get those for free. Just go to Food Lion, say, can I have your icing buckets? They'll give them to you. Go to dumpsters. It's like, actually, when I got started, I always went to dumpsters. I got like all my wood for tables from dumpsters, all my buckets from dumpsters, anything else good that's in a dumpster. So yeah, the more you can scavenge, the better. At the same time, weighing time versus money, because sometimes things take too long.
Yeah. Don't scavenge too much. It's taking too long.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother.
Yeah, that felt like that could be a whole episode. So yeah, I would say like basically probably with under $5,000, you could get started with some momentum. I would definitely recommend if you haven't thrown, that you don't just say, oh, I'm going to become a potter, that you join a community studio, that you find a potter near you who is making work that you like and see if you can work for them or take classes to make sure you enjoy it. And then the neat thing is you can always just start off slow, where you start making things, you slowly get better, you start giving things away to your family. Maybe eventually you start selling things. And in general, the quicker you want to sell something, the less you sell it for. So if you sell your mugs for like $5 or $10 at first, you'll move them to get money to keep on making more things. Mm-hmm. And then you would slowly increase your prices, see what people like or don't like. So putting your art in front of people is really helpful, because if they like it, keep on making it. If they don't like it, stop making it. So this is a whole nother philosophical question, or kind of not really debate, but what your advantage is. So if someone goes to art school to become a potter, your individual style is really important. You're supposed to like be unique and make something that people can say, oh, like, you made this mug. And like the art side is emphasized. Whereas if you take an apprenticeship, you're just learning to make like your master's pots. You make them over and over and over, and doing the same thing is more lifted up. So it's kind of like pottery you could come at from like an art perspective or a trade perspective. And it's really somewhere in between. But I say, yeah, trial by error, get as much experience working for someone else. Similar to like if you want to farm or bake, like it would be very valuable to gain experience under someone else's watch. Yeah. But I say kind of with any trade, like now's probably easier than ever to like be able to put your work out there and get a response and move in a direction that works to make money. And I've had friends who kind of just try and save up enough money and make a big jump, and other people do it like more subtly, where it can be like a slower transition. And there's like pros and cons to each, and I think it just depends on your life situation. I was fortunate because when I started, I didn't have any kids. I was like pretty lean. Like I kind of considered if I could buy cheese and paper towels, I was doing good. If I couldn't, I'd use newspaper. I found that like the dumpsters threw away tons of food that like you had ready access to. So I gotta be in the winter if I'm not making money. I could like find all the food I need.
Catching fish. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you can finding ways out and not just like going with the status quo of what needs to be done is helpful.
I love the bootstrap mentality.
Yeah,
this is awesome.
It's good to hear.
Especially where you are today, you know, I think like your lifestyle, again, not that it's perfect, but it is a beautiful thing. It's like you said about being able to wake up at night with your daughter who's sick and have a family and have a homestead where you're raising a bunch of your own food and have your means of employ 10 feet from your house. And I think people can idolize that in an unhealthy way, but I think also there's just a deep satisfaction and beauty, again, to the life you've created at your current farm. Do you have a name for your farm, by the way?
We call it Acorn, Pottery, and Farm.
And farm. I didn't know that. Okay.
Well, it's kind of can go either way, but our neighbor who like has a vineyard and a farm, they always joke. He's like, it's Acorn, Pottery, and Farm. A lot more pottery, a lot less farm.
That's your tagline.
John, one question we enjoy asking, and you've touched on this, and everybody has had a unique answer, which is cool. But as you consider the question, what is enough? What is enough? What's your answer to that question? As we talk about growth and money and size and 200 mugs, like what's enough for you and your family?
Yeah, I've thought about that because I've heard you guys ask that question. I want to be content with less. has been one of my thoughts. And I think I got that idea from some of the older surfers on Hatteras, whereas like the younger kids, and even myself when I was younger, like you go out into the ocean, like you just want to catch as many waves as you can, keep on going. Some of the older guys would like come out, catch like 3 or 4 waves and go in, and we're perfectly content and had just as good of a time as all the younger people who have been out there for like 4 or 5 hours. At the same time, I would like more. So like I wanted to be like, I want less. Like I would like to have more space for our family. I would like the pottery to grow, but I want to like really enjoy where we're at and be content, kind of regardless of how much or how little we have. Because I think there's like there's a natural inclination to like always look for more, which I don't think is necessarily bad to try and achieve that or go for it. But like I think it can come at the expense of enjoying and finding like joy where you are at and how things are.
Yeah, love that. Love the surfing analogy or the surfing piece of it. John, you're so cool because you're such a mixture of like, you have the Hatteras piece where you lived at the beach for 5 years. You have the mountain side. When I remember John's thing when you moved out here because you missed the ocean was like, you mentioned canoeing, but John's like a master of the river too. Like he needed to be connected
Touching
to water
water
still.
yeah.
Yeah, so you were like yeah, that helped spur me on. Like, I gotta find the rivers around here. Like, John knows all this stuff. He took his wife Megan and Jill were roommates in college. I remember you took the roommates down the river. Yeah. And I was like, Jill had pictures from. I was like, this looks awesome. That set a fire in us. But yeah, anyway, you're such a great amalgamation of all these things, and then having this beautiful place-based business. I think it's really special. If people haven't checked out Acorn Pottery, and farm, excuse me. Where can they do so?
Yeah, so our website is acornpottery.com, and on Instagram, I'm at Acorn Pottery, and my wife is at Acorn Pottery and Farm.
Awesome.
John, thanks so much for your time. It's been a treat. Learned a lot. Thanks for coming over.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I enjoyed talking with you guys, and I really enjoy listening to your podcast and hearing about your guys' lives and the businesses that you guys talk to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.